Bright lay crumpled on the ground. The tree loomed over him, its dark branches reaching out like sinister fingers.
Sandra and Mama Bright rushed to his side, their faces etched with panic and disbelief.
Mr. Bright's body trembled uncontrollably, as though the very air around him was charged with an unseen force.
Mama Bright fell to her knees beside her son, her eyes wide with horror and desperation.
"Richard! Richard, please!" Sandra cried, her voice breaking as she tried to wake her husband. "What's happening to him? What's wrong?"
Mama Bright, her hands shaking, tried to recall the old rituals meant to appease the spirits of their ancestors. She began muttering ancient incantations and prayers, hoping to calm whatever force had taken hold of her son. But the tree remained silent, its presence as ominous as ever. As the minutes ticked by, Mr. Bright's breathing steadied, but he remained unconscious, his body still twitching intermittently.
Sandra looked at Mama Bright, her eyes pleading for answers. "Mama, what do we do?" Sandra asked desperately.
Mama Bright, her face a mask of worry and sadness, replied, "We must perform the rituals to calm the spirit of the tree. Only then can we hope to get Richard back to his normal."
Back at Mr. David's home, Tina paced the living room, her mind racing. The conversation with Deborah had left her unsettled, and the mysterious disappearance of the school uniform continued to nag at her. She felt a strange sense of foreboding as she glanced at the empty space where the uniform had once been. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. She opened it to find Deborah standing there, her expression grave.
"I had to come back," Deborah said. "I've been thinking about Naomi and the uniform. There's something I haven't told you. I've heard stories about a powerful spirit that can manipulate objects and people. Some believe it can erase memories and control destinies."
You think the spirit is behind Naomi's disappearance?
It's a possibility, but there's something more troubling. The spirit might be tied to the uniform and the recent events.
Tina's thoughts raced as she considered this new information.
What should we do?
We need to investigate further. We need to find out if this spirit has any connection to Naomi's past or her family.
At the village, Mr. Bright lay unconscious as Sandra and Mama Bright hurried to perform the necessary rituals. They gathered sacred items, a small pot of white powder, a bundle of herbs, and a red cloth. Mama Bright placed the pot of powder at the base of the tree and sprinkled it around the area, praying fervently for forgiveness and appeasement. As they worked, a strange calm settled over the area. The air seemed to grow colder, and the wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the ancient tree. Suddenly, Mr. Bright stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked around, disoriented but alive.
"Richard, you're awake!"
Mr. Bright tried to sit up but was too weak. Mama Bright helped him to his feet, her face etched with worry.
"Richard, are you okay? Can you tell us what happened?"
The tree, it's not just a tree. It's a vessel for something dark and powerful. It tried to take me, but I think the rituals helped.
Mama Bright nodded, her face showing a mixture of relief and concern.
"We must be cautious. The spirit may still be angry. We need to find out more about it and what it wants."
Meanwhile, at the hospital, Tina and Deborah began their investigation into the mysterious spirit. They visited local libraries and archives, searching for any information related to the spirit or similar occurrences. They found a series of old manuscripts and records detailing various spirits and their interactions with humans. One document mentioned a spirit known as the Shadow Weaver, a malevolent entity that fed on despair and confusion. It was said to possess the power to manipulate objects and control destinies, causing people to lose their way and become trapped in a cycle of suffering. Tina and Deborah read through the documents with growing concern. The Shadow Weaver was known to target those who had unresolved grief or were in a vulnerable state. The more they read, the more it seemed that Naomi's case and the missing uniform might be connected to this spirit.
We need to act quickly.
We need to get Naomi and Mr. Bright involved. They might hold the key to stopping this spirit.
As the sun set over the village, Mr. Bright and Sandra prepared for their return journey. They were determined to find out more about the tree and the spirit that had caused.
Mama Bright handed Mr. Bright a small charm, a protective amulet that had been passed down through generations. "Wear this," Mama Bright said. "It will protect you from the spirit's influence."
Sandra and Mr. Bright made their way back to the city, their minds heavy with the knowledge of the Shadow Weaver. They knew their journey was far from over. Back at Mr. David's home, Tina and Deborah prepared for the next step. They decided to hold a ritual of their own to confront the spirit and break its hold on Naomi. They gathered everything they needed and prepared the space for the ceremony.
As they began the ritual, Tina couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, lurking in the shadows. She felt a chill run down her spine as the room grew colder. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls.
Deborah chanted the ancient incantations, and Tina followed suit. They focused their energy on confronting the Shadow Weaver and reclaiming control over their lives.
Suddenly, Naomi appeared in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. What's happening? Why are you doing this?
Tina and Deborah exchanged worried glances. Naomi, you shouldn't be here. We're trying to protect you from something dangerous.
The episode ends with Tina, Deborah, Mr. Bright, and Sandra all converging on their respective missions. The Shadow Weaver's presence looms large over their lives, and the struggle to break free from its grasp is only beginning.
The tension in the room was palpable as Naomi stood in the doorway, her face ashen and filled with fear.
Tina and Deborah continued their ritual, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls.
Outside, the wind howled, adding to the sense of impending doom.
Naomi's voice broke the heavy silence. I keep dreaming about a faceless man. He takes me to dark places and tells me things. Is this what you're trying to protect me from?
Tina, her hands trembling slightly, turned to Naomi. Yes, Naomi, we believe there's a dark force connected to your dreams, and we're trying to protect you from it.
Naomi's eyes widened. I don't remember much, but I know it feels real, like I'm being pulled into a dark void.
Deborah looked at Tina, her expression grave. We need to act quickly. The Shadow Weaver feeds on fear and confusion. If Naomi is connected to it, we must find a way to sever that connection.
Tina nodded, determination setting in. Let's continue the ritual. We need to strengthen our efforts and confront the Shadow Weaver directly.
As the ritual continued, Tina and Deborah chanted ancient incantations, their voices blending in harmony with the growing intensity of the ceremony. Naomi watched with wide eyes, her fear mingling with curiosity. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to dance with a life of their own. Tina's thoughts raced as she recited the words from the old texts. She felt a strange energy building up around them, a mixture of dread and hope. She glanced at Deborah, who was focused on the ritual, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the candles.
Suddenly, a gust of wind burst through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging us into darkness.
Naomi screamed, and Tina and Deborah rushed to relight the candles, their hands shaking.
When the candles were finally lit, the room seemed different.
The shadows on the walls had shifted, taking on more sinister forms. The air was thick with a palpable sense of unease.
Something's there. I can feel it.
Naomi's eyes were fixed on a dark corner of the room, her face pale.
Stay close to us, Naomi. We're going to finish this.
Deborah moved closer to Naomi, her expression tense. Tina continued chanting, her voice steady despite the growing darkness. She felt an intense pressure, as though something was pushing against her will. The temperature in the room dropped further, and a low, ominous whisper filled the air. Suddenly, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and undulating. It had no discernible features, just a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to breathe with malevolence. The Shadow Weaver.
Richard, we need to do something. We can't let this spirit control our lives. We need to take action.
In the village, Mr. Bright and Sandra had just returned home from the visit to Mama Bright. The chilling news about the faceless spirit had left them deeply unsettled. They were determined to find out more about the tree and the shadowy entity that had haunted their lives.
I don't know where to start. Mama Bright mentioned rituals and appeasement, but I don't know if that's enough.
We need to confront the spirit head-on. We need to find out its true intentions and put an end to this once and for all.
Sandra paced the living room, her mind racing.
Let's gather more information. We need to understand the spirit's weaknesses and how we can fight it.
Mr. Bright sat on the couch, his face etched with exhaustion. But as Sandra spoke, his resolve strengthened.
I don't want to be taken away. Please help me.
Back at Mr. David's house, Tina and Deborah were in the midst of their confrontation with the Shadow Weaver. The dark figure loomed over them, its presence filling the room with an oppressive weight. Naomi, standing close to Tina, felt a surge of fear and desperation. She reached out to Tina, her eyes filled with tears. Tina held Naomi's hand tightly, her voice steady as she chanted louder, trying to overpower the whispers of the Shadow Weaver. Deborah continued with the incantations, her face tense with concentration. The Shadow Weaver moved closer, its form growing more defined. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of despair and darkness. It seemed to be feeding off the fear in the room, growing stronger with each passing second. Tina and Deborah pushed forward, their voices rising in intensity. They could feel the power of the Shadow Weaver resisting their efforts, pushing back against their will.
Bright and Sandra researched. They came across an old book in a dusty corner of the library. The book was filled with ancient texts and illustrations depicting various spirits and their weaknesses. They scoured the pages for any information related to the Shadow Weaver.
Richard, look at this. It describes a ritual that might help us. It involves confronting the spirit in its own domain and using symbols of light and purity to drive it away.
This could be our chance. If we perform this ritual, we might be able to drive the Shadow Weaver away and bring Naomi back to safety.
Let's prepare everything we need. We'll need to act quickly.
David's home, the confrontation with the Shadow Weaver reached its peak. The dark figure writhed and shifted, its form becoming more chaotic. Tina and Deborah were exhausted, their voices faltering under the strain of the entity's power.
I don't want to be here. I want to go home.
Tina, struggling to maintain her focus, reached into her bag and pulled out a small, ornate mirror. The mirror had been passed down through generations in her family, said to have protective properties against dark entities. She held the mirror up, its surface reflecting the candlelight.
The Shadow Weaver recoiled from the light, its form momentarily destabilized. Tina and Deborah seized the opportunity, chanting louder and focusing their energy on the mirror.
The Shadow Weaver's whispers grew frantic, its form wavering as it tried to escape the light. The room was filled with a blinding light as the mirror's power intensified, pushing back against the darkness.
We have everything we need, Sandra. Let's do this.
Right behind you, Mr. Bright. Let's end this.
Mr. Bright and Sandra arrived at the house carrying the items needed for the ritual described in the book. They entered the living room to find the room bathed in an eerie light. The Shadow Weaver's form was writhing, and Tina and Deborah were visibly struggling.
We can't hold it much longer.
Hurry, set up the circle.
Sandra and Mr. Bright set up the ritual circle, placing symbols of light and purity around the room. They began chanting the words from the book, their voices blending with Tina and Deborah's. The combined power of their efforts created a surge of energy that overwhelmed the Shadow Weaver. The dark figure shrieked, its form dissolving into a cloud of shadows before vanishing completely. As the room returned to normal, the oppressive weight lifted, and the shadows receded. Tina, Deborah, Mr. Bright, and Sandra stood in the center of the room, their faces reflecting a mix of exhaustion and relief. Naomi, still shaken but safe, looked at Tina with gratitude.
Thank you for saving me. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here.
You're safe now, Naomi. We'll make sure nothing like this ever happens again.
Tina hugged Naomi tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. Deborah nodded, her face tired but satisfied.
The Shadow Weaver is gone. We've broken its hold over you.
Mr. Bright and Sandra looked at each other, a sense of closure settling over them.
Thank you. We couldn't have done it without your help.
The days that followed were filled with healing and recovery. Naomi slowly regained her confidence, and the darkness that had once loomed over them began to fade. Tina and Deborah continued to support her, helping her adjust to her new life. Mr. Bright and Sandra took solace in the fact that they had confronted the darkness and emerged victorious. They knew that the journey had changed them forever, but they were grateful for the strength they had found in each other. As they sat together sharing stories and laughter, they felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. The shadows that had once haunted them were now a distant memory, and they looked forward to the future with a sense of peace.